What's up everyone, Kaze no What If is here with What If One Piece characters reacted to One Piece openings. Before we start, if you like the video, like it, share with your friends, comment, and let's start the video. Asterisk disclaimer. I do not own anything One Piece related, that belongs to Oda asterisk. As the screen faded to black, the lights turned back on. Law had to blink a few times to get used to the room's brightness. He huffed as he could finally see without blinking every second and looked around the room. Everyone talked to their couch partners, kept quiet, or ate. Law scans his surroundings and sees the Roger trio talking amongst each other. He feels exhausted just looking at them. When the anonymous person said this viewing was longer, he didn't expect it to be almost an hour. Law could feel his limbs starting to numb, sitting in the same position for so long. He debated on whether he should get up to stretch his legs to possibly find a bathroom when a puff of smoke appeared in front of his face, and a piece of paper gently floated into his lap. Law was a little stunned at the sudden appearance of the article, as was Eustace from the annoyed face he was aiming at him. Law ignored him and prepared to read as the others who noticed the disturbance looked over, waiting for him to read the note. Law cleared his throat and read. If you need to use the bathroom, there are doors on either side of the chairs and couches that you can use. If you're hungry or thirsty, just quietly ask for something, and you can be granted it, as long as it's reasonable. There will be a small break before we continue with the viewings. We will start back up in 10 minutes. Law was sure that this person was a mind reader or something, or he was overthinking it. Either way, Law was pleased with the new information. He now won't be wondering if he would have to hold in his defecate. Just as he was about to get up to use the bathroom, he heard a quiet cabbage rolls. Law looked to his right and saw Eustace with his eyes closed and his head tilted towards the ceiling, clasping his hands together. Law thought he looked like he was praying. Eustace slowly opened his eyes when nothing happened, with Law still openly staring at him. Eustace turned towards him when he felt his stare, and Law raised an eyebrow at the man, and the red-haired man glared at him before a puff of smoke appeared before him, and a plate full of cabbage rolls gently landed on Eustace's lap. There was a beat of silence before the red-haired man smirked at Law before he started to gorge down his meal. Law rolled his eyes and got up to use the bathroom. As he stood, he looked at both sides of the room and thought the better option was to use the bathroom on the left so Law didn't run into someone he didn't particularly favor. Just as Law finished his business and started to wash his hands, he felt a presence enter the bathroom. Law tensed and looked into the mirror in front of him to see who was behind him. Law saw a flash of pink and quickly reached for his sword but cursed himself when he only grabbed air. He forgot that he didn't have his weapon and couldn't activate his devil fruit. Law could feel sweat start to trickle down his back when he made eye contact with the taller man. HMHMHMHM. Doflamingo smirked at him. They stared at each other through the mirror, the sound of running water filling the silence. Law tensed in anticipation before Doflamingo looked away from him and continued his way further into the bathroom. Law's eyes tracked the man through the mirror as he supposedly left his line of sight to use the bathroom. There was a beat of silence before the sound of a stall door closing brought Law out of his trance. Law quickly finished washing his hands and exited the bathroom. Why the hell was that feathered freak in there, he thought angrily. Doflamingo's chair is on the other side of the room, so he would have to stroll across the room. To what? To torment him. What a waste of time and effort. Law grits his teeth and continues walking to his seat when he hears his name being called and turns his head towards the voice, turning his face neutral. Hey, Trafalgar. Shanks waved at him as the other past pirates looked at him curiously. Law was tempted to return to the bathroom. At least he knew how to act towards Doflamingo, not two emperors, a pirate king, and two of their first mates. Shanks could see that he had a confused expression and made a waving motion with his hand that Law translates to, "Come over here." Law felt like he really didn't have a choice and slowly approached the men in their seats. He stopped in front of them and waited for one of them to speak. As you guys heard before, Shanks started before nodding his head towards Law. This is Trafalgar Law. The others looked at him up and down, analyzing him, and Law tried not to fidget under their gaze and stood still, wanting Red Hair to get to the point. Trafalgar. Shanks looked at him before gesturing to his captain. You also probably know, but this is my former captain, Gold. Roger, his first mate Silver's Rayleigh. Yes, Law already knew that. He guessed Shanks wanted to do a proper introduction, not that Law knows why. Shanks then gestures to the couch next to them. Edward Newgate, Whitebeard, and his first mate Marco. Law nodded towards all of them in respect, not wanting to get on their wrong side, and waited for Red Hair to say why he called him over here finally. Quiet one, isn't he? Rayleigh said with an amused smile. Law was tempted to glare at the man who found his predicament amusing but refrained and forced his expression to be blank. Hey, relax, man, Marco said with a laid-back grin, we don't bite. Law realized he was a little too stiff, probably from his encounter in the bathroom, and slowly relaxed his shoulders. Law guessed he was being a little impolite and decided to speak to them. Why did you call me over, Red Hair? Okay, maybe that wasn't so polite, Law realized after he demanded more than he asked the man. He winced at his own words but slightly relaxed when Shanks only laughed. As Marco said, relax, and you can call me Shanks, the man laughed, Red Hair sounds too formal. All right. Law agreed before he saw the man look at him expectantly. Law sighed. Shanks, why did you call me over? The man smiled at him before he looked at his companions, and Roger looked at Law and said, we was curious about you and your knowledge about Luffy. Law should have guessed that's why they called him over. Roger had a calculating look, as did the others, and explained further. How do you know so much about Luffy? Law could hear the underlining in his words even though the man had a neutral expression on his face. The Pirate King is fond of Luffy, Law thought warily. He gathered his thoughts together before speaking. He is an infamous pirate, not a lot of people don't know about Straw Hat Luffy. Roger had a suspicious look on his face, clearly not believing that Law was telling the whole truth, which Law thinks is fair since he was somewhat vague with his answer. Before Roger even opened his mouth, Shanks quickly intervened. Don't worry about it, Captain, the man said with an easygoing smile. Trafalgar helped Luffy when he was in danger. We don't need to be wary of him. Shanks' words seemed to reassure his captain, as he didn't seem as guarded as he was when Law first entered the conversation. Although the said couldn't be said for his first mate, he looked at Law and Shanks with a calculating look. As for Law, he didn't believe a word that the red-haired man said. He knew the man wasn't stupid to think he should trust Law just because he helped Luffy once. Shanks smiled at his captain before he turned to Law. Law felt like the man was staring into his soul with how intensely his eyes bored into his. Law saw the man's message through his eyes, I'm watching you. Not like Law would do anything in the first place, he didn't want to sign his death warrant. Law was silently grateful that the emperor he tried to take down was Kaido but wasn't reassured by that thought, dreading his plans to lead up to the conflict. Law decided he didn't want to leave on bad terms and thought to give his opinion to make conversation and hopefully soothe their wariness. Luffy is a reckless pirate that drags a lot of attention. Law said as the others looked at him in surprise, although that can come off as arrogant, he does it for his crew and his dreams, as I'm sure you've all seen, and that is something to respect. Law could tell they were surprised by his words, but he didn't make any notion that he noticed. Shanks looked at him for a second before he laughed in agreement with Law's words. The others seem to relax as the tension diffuses, but Law knows that Red Hair will continue to watch him. Law isn't worried about that because he doesn't have ill intentions towards Luffy, maybe he was using him a little bit, but it also seemed that Straw Hat was going to agree with his proposal for an alliance before he got transported here. Law decided he would worry about Shanks in the future because he had more significant worries. Law was still standing in front of the couch as they continued to talk, lost in his thoughts. Law heard bits and pieces of the conversation, mostly about them wondering what they would be watching in a few minutes. And with that thought, Law realized that their time was almost up. "I wonder if we will see any more fights," Marco exclaimed with a grin, clearly wanting to see more action. Whitebeard laughed at his son's words but nodded in agreement. "I am also curious to see how much stronger the boy gets," Rayleigh said as he scratched his beard in thought. "Since we will be starting in a few minutes," Law interjected, "I will head back to my seat." Roger and Marco frowned at his words, to Law's confusion. "Oh yeah, I guess our 10 minutes are almost up," Marco said a little disappointedly before he perked up at the thought of watching more viewings. Law was just about to start walking towards his seat when the Pirate King voiced, "Hey, Trafalgar." Law looked at the man with the raised eyebrow, smiling so wide it looked like it hurt his cheeks. "If we have more breaks, come over here with your friend." Law was stunned at the man's words. He was so blunt that he reminded him of someone. Law could slowly feel the heat rise in his cheeks as Roger continued to smile brightly at him. He could hear a snicker from the Phoenix and gave him a slight glare before he nodded at Roger in agreement, as he could refuse, and slowly turned around and walked back to his shared couch. "Wait, did he say friend?" Law finally returned to his seat without interruptions and saw Eustace finishing his 12th plate of cabbage rolls. Law sighed, sat down, and closed his eyes to collect himself. Law felt that this was going to be a long and stressful day. Wait, day. Law had a sudden thought and jerked his eyes open in horror. Law could feel Eustace stare at him from the sudden movement. "What's wrong with you?" Eustace asked accusingly as his empty plates vanished in thin air. Law debated whether or not he should share but decided he needed to share his thoughts. "Do you think we will be here for more than a day?" Law asked slowly. Eustace had a blank look as he took in Law's words. Slowly the man's eyes widened in horror as Law's did a moment ago. "Damn, if I am going to be in this room for more than a day, I'd rather die. I could care less about Straw Hat." Eustace grumbled in anger. Law felt the same way and dreaded the honest answer to his question. Suddenly, a puff of smoke appeared before him, and paper slowly fell from it. Everyone looked over at the noise and waited for Law to read the note. Law was seriously wondering why he was the messenger now. Law caught the paper and read it aloud. "All right, your 10 minutes are up, so that we will continue. Before that, though, I heard that some of you had questions, and I will answer them." Law was now concerned for his privacy and his mind from this person. "If you wonder if this will take more than a day, the answer is yes." Law closed his eyes and sighed. He heard voices of protest at the mystery person's answer, and Law felt the same way. "I have better things to do than to watch a brat pretending to be a pirate," Kaido voiced with a scowl on his face. Kaido directed his glare toward Law since he delivered the response. Law tried to ignore the beast and continued to read. "But don't worry, the time has momentarily stopped from outside this room." Well, that does make things a little easier, Law thought. Some protesting stopped as Law continued. "As for how long you stay here, it won't be more than 2 weeks." Law stared blankly at the paper. He did not find the smiley face amusing or reassuring. He wasn't sure he would be able to survive here for more than a few hours. The others in the room looked like they wanted to object, but they seemed to accept that they couldn't leave, even if they wanted to. "As for the viewing," Law continued, "this one will be long just like the last one, and it is set a few days after. So, sit back and enjoy." Law wanted to cry. He had hoped all the viewings would be shorter like the first one. Law had to prepare himself as the paper vanished mentally. Everyone settled into their seats and faced forward. The lights started to dim, and the screen lit up. Snow is seen everywhere as it blizzards. A figure is seen trudging through the snow. We see Luffy walking as he carries Nami on his back and Sanji in his arm. Okay, we missed something, Marco said with a raised eyebrow. It looks like Luffy's crewmates are unconscious. Whitebeard pointed out. From how Nami's skin has a red hue, Law would say that she is either sick or from the cold. The same could be said for the black leg, but he noticed dried blood on him, so Law concludes it could be from blunt trauma. Law wonders what Straw Hat is doing. He hopes to seek medical aid. Luffy is red from the cold and struggling to walk against the wind. Doctor. Luffy says desperately as he trudges through the snow, Doctor. Doctor. Good. At least the hyperactive captain is being serious about his situation. I hope Luffy's crewmates will be okay, Marco said with concern. Whitebeard noticed his son's worry and gently patted Marco on his shoulder, and the phoenix slowly relaxed at his touch. Marco looked up at his captain and smiled in thanks before returning his eyes to the screen. Suddenly a wall emerges from the snow in front of Luffy, and he looks up and sees a very tall mountain. So this is it? Luffy says tiredly, I can't even see the top. Don't tell me Straw Hat plans to climb that thing while carrying two people, Eustace said in disbelief. Law looked over at the man who had his eyebrows raised in skepticism. From knowing how reckless and brash Straw Hat is so far, Law started as Eustace looked over at him, is that a question? Eustace seemed to think over his words, then huffed and looked away. Yeah, I guess he's a reckless idiot. Eustace begrudgingly imitated. Law didn't expect the red-haired man to agree, at least out loud, and smirked at his reluctance. Law also thought Eustace didn't have any room to talk about being reckless. He saw plenty of that at Sabayati from the red-haired man. Luffy breathes heavily as he stares at the mountain. At the top, Luffy states determinedly, there's a doctor. Nami is shown passing out on Luffy. Law could see the others' confusion at Nami's state and decided he could inform them of her condition. The navigator is sick, Law announced. The others looked over at him when he spoke. How'd you know? Roger asked curiously. The other past pirates and Shanks also looked curious and focused their attention on Law. From how Nami is breathing and her skin color, it is easy to tell that she is sick and it wasn't from the cold. Law started, looks like the sickness started a few days ago by the way she is unconscious. I also don't see any bruises or bandages on her, at least not visible ones, so I assume Nami is sick. The others seemed impressed with his knowledge as they nodded to his analysis. You seem very knowledgeable, Rayleigh pointed out. I'm a doctor, Law stated. Cool. You're a doctor and a captain, Marco said with a smile. Law didn't know how to take the compliment and just nodded, if not a little awkwardly, at the phoenix and turned to look back at the screen. Hang on a little longer. Luffy tightens the cloth wrapped around him and Nami, Sanji. Luffy bites Sanji's shirt and holds onto the side of the mountain. Luffy climbs the mountain with his bare hands and feet. Why is Anchor in the middle of a blizzard? Shanks sighed as he pinched the bridge of his nose, barefoot. The others stayed silent, not knowing how to answer the man. Law was also wondering about that fact, also about Straw Hat wearing shorts in this weather. He doesn't think it is practical in the middle of a snowstorm, but Law decides not to overthink it and focus on Nami and Sanji's condition. Luffy breathes heavily as he climbs the mountain, carrying Sanji with his mouth and Nami on his back. Luffy's coat on Nami's back flies off her from the wind. Luffy determinedly grits his teeth and keeps climbing. Doctor. Luffy grunts as he slowly ascends the mountainside. Doctor. Luffy reaches his arm up to continue climbing, but his hand slips. His nails crack, and blood seeps out of his wounds. Law grimaces at the sight, but there are worse things he has seen. Shit. Marco hisses as he cringes at the display. Ouch. Luffy shouts. By doing so, Sanji falls from Luffy's mouth. Moron, Eustace grumbled with an eye roll. Luffy soon realizes his mistake and shouts, Sanji 8th. Luffy stretches his neck as Sanji falls and bites down on Sanji's coat. Sanji bounces a few times from the recoil. I almost forgot he was rubber. Marco sighed in relief. Luffy grits his teeth on the coat and says, Too close. Luffy is now further up the mountain. Doctor! 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 Law could tell that Straw Hat cared for his crew, which was refreshing to see because you don't know a lot of captains devoted to their crew. It's usually about gold and power, but Straw Hat is different. Law is now gaining new respect for the man, even if he's a little obnoxious. What an admirable captain! Rayleigh grinned as he eyed his own. Roger nodded in agreement with a gleam in his eye as he observed Luffy, frozen on the screen, in the middle of climbing the mountain. Luffy is turning red from the cold, and blood pours down his hand from his cracked nails. As Luffy reaches up to grab the side of the mountain, he slips and falls. Luffy uses his hands and feet to scrape across the mountainside to try to stop. Ah geez, Marco said, cringing at the screen, Luffy just can't catch a break. Law was also grimacing at all the blood and Straw Hat's screams. The injuries on their own are pretty terrible, but adding that he was in the cold didn't help. Common anchor, Law barely heard from his left, push through. Blood starts to pour off his fingertips and toes as he continues to fall. Luffy screams as his appendages are being abused. Luffy is finally able to stop and takes a moment to catch his breath. Luffy slowly starts to climb the mountain with a determined face. Hang on. Luffy thinks, we're almost there. Don't die on me. Even more, blood runs down Luffy's arms and legs as he continues to climb. Luffy has a purplish, reddish color to his skin from the cold and grunts as he ascends. Luffy finally reaches the top and drops Sanji from his mouth. He looks up and notices a castle that is covered in snow. Hopefully, a doctor is in that castle. Marco grunted, it looks abandoned. Luffy better not have climbed this god-forsaken mountain for nothing. Don't worry, son. Whitebeard said reassuringly, I'm sure everything works out fine. Marco loosened his tense shoulders at his father's words and turned toward the screen. Made it? Luffy says breathlessly. Luffy's vision starts to go blurry, and passes out on the snowy ground. Doctor! Suddenly the snow that Luffy is lying in shifts, and Luffy starts to fall off the side of the mountain with Nami still on his back. Everything is not fine. Marco shouted with wide eyes. The other past pirates also had wide eyes at the turn of events. Before he could fall, a fury hand grabbed Luffy's. There was a collective sigh of relief from the left side of the room, that may or may not include Law. See, everything is fine, Whitebeard said confidently. Marco turned towards his captain and pointed up at him. You didn't know everything was fine. Marco shouted accusingly, I saw your face. I don't know what you're talking about, son, Whitebeard said casually with a slight shrug. Stop gaslighting me. Marco yelled as blue flames started to flicker across his shoulders. Gururara. It's just a bit of fun, Marco, Whitebeard laughed and gently smiled, no harm done, besides, Luffy and his crewmates are safe. Marco seemed to calm down and huffed at his father before turning back to the screen, as did Whitebeard as he chuckled at his son's actions. Law also saw Roger Trio lightly chuckling at the father and son interaction. A vast furry figure with a red hat is holding Luffy. The face of the creature is shadowed by his hat, except for a blue nose. The scene fades to black. A big furry creature with a blue nose. Roger stated with his head tilted, I don't think I have ever seen a creature like that before. Neither have I. Rayleigh and Shanks said simultaneously. What an exquisite creature. Big Mom said with a sparkle in her eyes, another one to add to my collection. Collection? Law thought. He does not want to know what that means from the tone in the Emperor's tone. Anyways, Marco deflected from Big Mom's comment, I wonder what that creature was. At least it seemed like it helped Luffy. Hopefully, he finally gets a doctor. The other past pirates and Shanks nodded in agreement. Law also was wondering about the creature, although he did think it looked a little familiar. He decided to think about it later and watch the next scene that was starting up. It's snowing while a pirate flag is blowing in the wind. The flag is torn, and there are cherry blossom petals on the flag. Interesting pirate flag. The design intrigued Roger, saying, although it looks a little torn up. Yeah, I wonder how that happened. Marco wondered. Dalton! A voice suddenly shouted. Law flinched at the sudden shout. PFFTT. Law sharply turned his head to the noise and glared at his couch buddy. The red-haired man found his actions amusing, Law thought dryly. Law rolled his eyes at the immature man beside him and turned forward. Terrible news. Dalton is shown with a confused face as a man runs up to him, holding a piece of paper. Who are they? Marco asked with a raised eyebrow. The others shrugged, not knowing the answer. I just remembered something important. What is it? Dalton asks. Take a look at this. The man shoves the paper towards Dalton. Dalton grabs it and sees Luffy's bounty. Luffy's bounty? Shanks said warily, analyzing the screen. Law thinks he was trying to decipher to see if these people were friends or enemies. The other past pirates tense at seeing Luffy's bounty, protectiveness shining in their eyes. It's him. The man exclaims, the pirate with the straw hat that defeated Wapol. No doubt about it. Defeated who now? Marco asked. Everyone looked at each other in confusion, not recognizing the name. By the sound of it, Luffy helped them out. Rayleigh deduced. Before anyone could say anything, the screen suddenly turned black. Everyone turned toward the screen, tense, waiting for anything to happen. There was a beat of silence before white text started to appear, which read. You are correct, Rayleigh. Luffy did help these people by defeating a man trying to conquer their kingdom. Well, that would have been nice to know, Eustace grumbled to himself. Yes, you are correct, kid. I should have informed you of the situation so you wouldn't be lost. Eustace looked shocked about being called out but huffed at the screen. This kingdom is called Drum Island. As I'm sure you've all concluded, Luffy sailed here to find Nami a doctor. Luffy reached the top of the mountain, and the creature that caught him was a doctor. He is a reindeer who ate the human fruit, whose name is Tony Chopper. Luffy liked him and asked Chopper to join his crew, which Chopper eventually agreed to. This is set right after the Straw Hats left for Alabasta. The more Law read, the more it made sense why he thought the creature looked familiar. He had seen Tony Chopper's bounty in the past, but when he saw the low reward, he moved on. It seemed like Straw Hat helped another person's home for them to become a crewmate, Law thought dryly. He wondered if this would be a recurring theme. So, that big furry creature with a blue nose is a doctor on Luffy's crew? Marco all but summed up. Seems like it, Roger said with a slight shrug. Right, the cotton candy lover, Tony Chopper. Shanks said, nodding, I didn't recognize him in this form. I thought he was just a pet Luffy picked up, it turns out he's a doctor. Shanks had a thoughtful look on his face at the new information. Law was interested in Tony Chopper's skills as a doctor but turned towards the screen when it lit back up. A 30 million berry bounty? On him? Dalton asks skeptically. Oh. Dr. Kurha voices curiously, he must be quite the villain. Law heard a snort from the right side of the room. Dr. Kurha laughs as she walks toward Dalton. Where did you get this? Dalton asks the man. I forgot to tell you about this when it happened, but... The man starts before the scene changes to show a deserted road with buildings alongside it. About a week ago in Rebel Town, this traveler showed up all of a sudden. The wind starts to pick up, and a man wearing all black appears in the middle of the road. "Well, someone's dramatic," Eustace said with an eye roll. "Besides that," Marco interrupted, "who is he?" There were some shrugs at the question. Strangely, it didn't snow at all that day. "We have no idea where the heck he came from. Anyway, he said he was after Blackbeard, the same pirate that ransacked our country." "Blackbeard?" several voices asked simultaneously. There was a beat of silence before Marco asked, "Who's Blackbeard?" Law saw Shanks shift in his seat in an uncomfortable manner. "Blackbeard is one of the 4 emperors," the red-haired man said vaguely. "An emperor, huh?" Whitebeard commented. As he turned toward the towering man, Law saw Shanks nod with a pitying look. "Blackbeard is actually from your crew." Whitebeard raised his eyebrow at the red-haired man in slight surprise while Marco was openly gaping. "Are you going to elaborate, or leave me to guess, brat?" Whitebeard grunted. Shanks hesitated before answering, the others noticing and watching the 2 men in tense silence. "Marshal D. Teach." Whitebeard looked more confused than surprised at the declaration. "Didn't expect that brat to be so ambitious." There was a small huff of laughter from the right side of the room. "There's a lot you don't know about Blackbeard, old man." Doflamingo laughed. "Then enlighten me." Whitebeard countered. Doflamingo smirked at the taller man and replied in silence. Law gritted his teeth in annoyance before turning to the conversation at hand. Shanks shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable being the one to relay the upsetting information to the captain. Law is glad he is not in his shoes. "Blackbeard betrayed you," Shanks rushed. "He murdered one of your crewmates for a devil fruit." There was a tense silence. "You want to run that by me again, boy?" Whitebeard said dangerously. Shanks shifted in his seat but held Whitebeard's gaze with confidence. "Teach murdered one of your crewmates," Shanks said slowly. Whitebeard closed his eyes, lost in thought. Marco had a look of disbelief on his face, clearly not wanting to believe the words he was hearing. Law didn't know all the details about Blackbeard, and it was certainly interesting to listen to what happened, and he had some sympathy for them, but this had already happened to him 2 years ago. "That traitor!" Whitebeard roared, "I gave that brat everything after he begged on his knees. And this is how he repays me." The room started to shake from the intensity. Law tried not to move into action at the possible threat, not that he could. He could feel an invisible force pushing him down in his seat. Eustace seemed to be having the same problem with how he grunted. Law looked over to see a furious captain with a dark aura surrounding him. He could see Roger trying to calm him down, but it looked like Whitebeard wasn't listening to any of the words the man spoke to him. There was a slight sniffle, and everyone stopped to look at the noise. Marco had a troubled look on his face, sniffing every few seconds, trying not to let his tears fall. "One of my brothers is murdered by my other brother," Marco softly said with a shaky breath. Law could hear the distress in the teen's voice. He was worried that the boy would have a panic attack. Whitebeard immediately calmed down and looked soft as he gazed down at his troubled son. Whitebeard warped his large arm around Marco and cradled his son. Law breathed a sigh of relief and sat back in his seat, now that he could finally move again. He moved his eyes away from the scene that seemed very personal and tried to steady his heartbeat from the sudden adrenaline rush. He made eye contact with Eustace, and they shared a look that translated to, "I'm glad that's over," before they looked away from each other, not admitting that they were seeking comfort. Everyone took a few minutes to collect themselves and settle in their seats. Whitebeard and Marco finally calmed down from their rush of emotions and faced the screen. The scene changed back to the man who showed Dalton Luffy's bounty and continued. But once he found out the pirates had long since left here. Then I'll ask another question, the man in black said. We see the mystery man's side profile. All we see are his freckles as his hat shadows his eyes. His black hair shaped his face. Wait, isn't that? Has a pirate wearing a straw hat ever come here? The mystery man asked. Does this man know Luffy? Roger said with a raised eyebrow, his protective side showing through. Law saw Shanks observing the screen with a calculating look. Law also looked at the man frozen on the screen. Law has a pretty good idea who that man is, and he bet the red-haired does as well. When I said I didn't know, he gave us this poster and said, "If he does come here," the man in black says with an intense stare. "If he comes?" The other man asks timidly. "Tell him I'll only wait in Alabasta for 10 days, the mystery man smirks as he points toward the other two. "This is suspicious," Marco said quietly. Law guessed the teen was still depressed over the news he heard earlier, not that he blames him. "Yeah, this man seems to know Luffy personally," Roger commented. "Maybe he has a personal vendetta against him," Rayleigh thought out loud. Shanks looked over at them warily. "I'll leave it with you," he turns and walks away. "Hey, wait a moment. What's your name?" "Oh, yes. Yeah, that's right," the man in black says nonchalantly. The man slowly turns back around, eyes shadowed by his hat, and smirks. "My name is Ace." "Ace, huh?" Rayleigh said as he scratched his beard. "Someone write that down." Roger said hurriedly, "We got to make a list of names of everyone who wants to hurt Luffy." Shanks side-eyed his captain, and Law seriously wondered if the man would drag out the surprise any longer. "Ah, Ace, my grandson," Garp said nonchalantly. Shanks sighed at the man as he continued to snack on his crackers. "Your grandson?" Marco and Roger said incredulously. The Marine didn't respond, acting like he couldn't hear anything. "So, Ace is Luffy's brother then," Whitebeard stated. "Yes," Shanks replied a little hesitantly. Rayleigh glanced at his cabin boy with suspicion before facing the screen. "Oh," Roger said, "I guess we don't need that list then. When he comes by, tell him that, and he'll figure it out," the man chuckles before walking away again. Suddenly a man rushes in and shouts, "Oi! Someone grab that guy!" Ace flinches violently at being caught. "He's an eat and run. I'll leave it with you." Ace shouts and runs away. "He's funny," Marco said with a small laugh, his mood improving from before. Whitebeard smiled down at his son. The scene changes back to the night as it snows. Waiting in Alabasta for 10 days, Ed. Dalton asks. Dalton notices Dr. Kurha looking at Luffy's bounty. "Dr. Kurha." Dalton voices, "What's the matter? You seem distant. Do you know of Gold?" "Roger." Dr. Kurha asks with a small smile. There were some shocked and confused noises at the name. "Huh? Me?" Roger asked with a blink. "Why would she be asking about you?" Rayleigh questioned with a raised eyebrow. "I don't know." Roger shrugged, just as confused as the others. "D?" Dalton questions, "You mean Gold Roger?" The screen shows the Pirate King on his execution day. "Is that what they call him now?" Dr. Kurha asks. "Dr. Kurha looks down, and we see Luffy's bounty. It looks like my little reindeer has followed a dangerous man. So it still lives. The will of D. Dr. Kurha says with a smile. The scene fades to black. Law now had a lot of questions. First, was Chopper, the little reindeer this old woman was referring to? Second, why is Straw Hat a dangerous man? Third, the will of D. That last one wasn't a question, but still puzzling. Law has heard the term before but not understanding it fully. He hopes he can finally answer some questions if these viewings keep showing the future. Shanks suddenly faced his captain and said, "Captain, I have to tell you something." Roger looked at him in confusion before slowly nodding, urging Shanks to continue. Shanks hesitated before saying, "Ace is your son." There was a beat of silence before. "What?" Roger exclaimed with wide eyes. Shanks looked a little sheepish with the way he blurted out the statement but otherwise nodded in confirmation. Rayleigh also looked shocked but in a more controlled manner. "Wait, what but huh?" the Pirate King stuttered out. Rayleigh slowly patted Roger's back, trying to comfort his best friend before turning to Shanks with his eyebrows furrowed. "Isn't he Luffy's brother, though? How can he be Roger's son?" Roger stopped in the middle of his panic attack and looked from Rayleigh to Shanks. "Yeah," Roger exclaimed, "he can't be my son if he is Luffy's brother." Shanks sighed before explaining. "Ace and Luffy aren't blood related, they're bond brothers." Rayleigh nodded at his words in understanding, and Roger looked lost in thought. "He does look like Roger," Whitebeard commented. "Really?" Marco asked, tilting his head with closed eyes. "I don't see it." Roger seemed to ignore the conversation instead of thinking about his presumed son. Law could see a mixture of emotions form on the man's face, the most prominent being happiness. "He is my son?" Roger asked Shanks with hopeful eyes. Shanks smiled at his captain. Law could see a slight flare of sadness and nodded. Roger's face formed into the brightest smile he had ever seen, and Law had to look away not to be blinded. "Can we move on now?" Big Mom said with a huff. Some of the others glared at her for ruining the moment but decided moving on would be best. They all settled in their seats and faced the screen. Chapter 7. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you liked it, subscribe to my channel for more fan fictions like this, and goodbye.